I have loved this conversation, but now I want to talk about a world that both of us are quite familiar with, and that is the world of church life, and particularly as it relates to the mission, the vision, the emphasis that comes in the life of a church. So for those, let's say, who are active in ministry or church life or Christians, and they look at church services and they're like, how do they get that figured out? One of the tensions that is often very much a part of this whole experience is like when you're planning a service. So both of us have had experience on church staffs and part of planning services. There's this tension between, are we speaking to people who are not yet convinced that this is the truth, like they just show up at church, maybe they're in a life crisis and not really sure if they believe, or are we speaking to people who are already convinced that are trying to figure out how to grow in their faith? And a lot of the conversation that happens in church world is that you have to pick.
Yeah.
Again, either or. And I'm curious, as you were involved, and I'll talk a little bit about my experience too, how did you bring it to the end?
That's a great question. It's funny that you should bring that up because we had these really extensive creative meetings. They would last all day. And we have a bunch of people with different backgrounds. So you've got like your, person who's super evangelical. You've got almost like, this like authoritative person, all these different personalities. And one of the things for me is, again, I think just due to who I am as a person and just my mindset, I live in the and, right? So like we're going to hit these people and we're going to hit these people. And I think of like the big services like Easter, Christmas, where you're going to get this influx. And one of the fights that we would always have was over picking music selections. And, a lot of people may not agree with this, but I was always a really big fan of taking sometimes, secular music or music that was really popular for people that they, I don't want to say trending, but just music that was relevant to the time or situations or things that are familiar, and taking that and using that to kind of illustrate the gospel and using that so that people could feel something familiar with something that maybe they didn't know. And that was something that was always a tension point of, you can't do that. You can't mix secular and this. You can't do those things. And I'm like, you can, with the power of the and we can use that to be able to minister to people who are on different parts of the Christian journey. And so
how would you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So how would you deal with the critique of those that would say, oh, but you can't mix the sacred and secular? It's like, this is a sacred place. You're kind of infiltrating with the secular. That's just you. That's irreverent. That's not allowed.
That brings me to our next one, which is the power of why. No, but first you just say like, well, why not? But at the most base level, I really tried to. We would go line by line for the lyrics. We would go line by line, figure out, why, how does this apply? How can this be used? Is there any part of this that, I'm not a fan of? It makes me cringe when people change lyrics. I hate that. So either the whole song works or it doesn't. But, we would go through, we'd find scriptures that supported the different things. I'll never forget, we did a project where we used at the movies, you know what I mean? It was like a big thing in the summer, and you kind of play clips of a movie. And we did the movie Moana, and there's a part in the movie where she says, she's talking to another character, but the song she sings says, I've crossed the horizon to find you. I know your name. And so when I did the pitch or something like that, even though there were people on my own team that were like, you cannot do this, this is, fire and brimstone, you can't do it. And I'm like, who do you know who says that? And there's someone who's going to come in, or there's someone who's already on the journey who they're going to be like, that's my Jesus right there. You know what I mean? So that's using something like that. That's a great tangible example of the and. A person who was farther along on the journey was like, that's the Jesus I know, the Jesus who will cross the horizon for me, the Jesus who knows every single person's name in this room. So that person, we're hitting that need. But then there's also somebody coming in who's like, I've seen this movie. That's $1 billion movie, box offices across the world. It's familiar. It's safe. I'm going to come in. I never thought to see it that way. And now I have a better understanding of how deep and how far and how much Jesus loves me.
And I think that there's something to be said too. And this was something that we kind of had to circle back. So this was before I came and worked at the same church that you did. So when we were doing these kinds of conversations, one of the questions we would ask is it okay to offend someone in this? And if so, who? Right? So, like, when you think about the whole idea of Jesus leaving the 99 and going after the lost one, you could almost interpret that to say Jesus was willing to offend the 99 in order to reach the one.
Yeah.
And so, what are the practical implications of that in a service? Like, is it okay for me to create something with art that is edgy and not necessarily going to, speak meaningfully to a person who's fully devoted? In fact, I may even alienate them. But is it okay to alienate them for the sake of the one that's there that doesn't know?
And I mean, that is probably a question that could be raised till the end of time, right? Nobody knows. If someone had the answer to that, right, we wouldn't be talking about this. But yeah, I think that goes to. But again, what my main takeaway is that if regular everyday people were walking around and they're thinking of, and I can go to church and get what I need, and somebody who doesn't know Jesus like I know him is going to be here, right? Like if we could get, again, I want to encourage my friends and my family and strangers. If we just started walking around, I think that would increase a level of compassion. I think it would increase a level of just awareness for your neighbors and the people around you. And why would I be offended that somebody else might need that? That's just like an absurd thing to think about. And I think a lot of people, specifically in the church setting, they're some of the most offended people. And it's like, okay, you didn't get something from that, but you might take away something else. And what I love, I have seen a lot of really modern day preachers, but a lot of preachers, really good preachers, they'll say, not everything in this message is for you. And sometimes they'll kind of say that at the beginning. I think I've even heard you say that before. It's just like, people are going to take away different nuggets. And I think that's how, as leaders, we approach the end, is that you should be, in my opinion, you should be designing your message knowing that you have a diverse audience. You should be designing the examples that you use, the illustrations that you use. You should be thinking of every aspect, the diversity in your audience, the ages, stages, seasons, all of those things. And you should be including that when you're designing your services.
And I think that's, again, going back to the basic thing that we've been talking about all along. The genius of the and is that you can take all of that into account when you are planning a service or you're planning a marketing strategy or anything that we're talking about, a university setting. We want to be able to say, let's think through the genius of the and in all of these ways, because it gives us an opportunity to reach more people.
Yeah. Like, how did you utilize that when you were putting together messages? Or did you even?
Yeah. So I would say that the key for me was to start with the person who was probably least convinced. And what I found was that when I would start that way, there were already some people who would probably categorize themselves as convinced that didn't know why they were believing what they were believing. Mm-hmm. And so when I was starting that way, they thought, oh, this is for them. And then all of a sudden, halfway through, they're like, hey, that was a question I had too. And so I think sometimes it's about like the biggest question I think most believers have, and I know this is for probably another conversation, but I think most people have the question, what does faith look like lived out in my everyday life? So I can hold to certain values, certain ideas, but I need to know, how is that going to relate and affect my daily life? And I think if that's where you live, in whatever part of the service you're talking about, music, drama, readings, message, that is going to help people regardless of where they are. And again, I think that's part of like thinking through, how can I include everybody in this talk?
Yeah, I'm utterly convinced that Jesus lived in the and. Like, this woman is a possible prostitute and I love her. You know what I mean? Like these people, these people believe the Pharisees, I believe maybe they believe that they're doing what's right, and I'm going to flip this table. Do you know what I mean?
Well, and even on the cross, when you think about it, these people that killed him, he did not take an either or position on the cross either.
He did not.
He said, forgive them, for they do not know. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do.
If that's not an and, I don't know what is. And so again, going back to the initial question, And the whole point of this entire conversation, we're on like part 5 now or so, but the whole point of this is that if everyday people can walk out of this and say, I'm going to start to apply the and step 1 in my faith, right? I can be in a really bad place and I can believe that God's not done with my story. As a leader, I can structure this service for these people and these people, and I think that that'll just start trickling into your regular life. And I think we're going to have happier, healthier, stronger, capable adults that are not having mental health crises all the time if they can just start implementing this one small thing. But there's so much power and just the genius of literally the word and in your vocabulary.
I love it. Let's end there.